Take a look at a map of Europe. Now imagine you're forced to build a nation right here. No coastline, no navy, no easy trade routes. You're surrounded by mountains that slow everything down: people, goods, armies, ideas. For centuries, the land barely produces enough food to keep your population alive. You don't discover oil. You don't strike gold. No gas fields. No diamonds buried underground. You never build an empire. You never extract wealth from distant colonies. No one sends you tribute. If this were a strategy game, most players would restart. Because by every conventional rule, this place shouldn't win. It shouldn't even survive. And yet, this country didn't just survive. It became one of the richest, most stable places on Earth. Today, Switzerland ranks among the highest in income per person anywhere in the world. Its currency is treated like a shelter during global crises. When financial systems shake, money doesn't flee Switzerland, it hides there. This isn't accidental, and it isn't because the Swiss are magically smarter or more virtuous. In fact, the real story is far less comfortable. Switzerland didn't build its wealth by producing more. It didn't get rich by growing faster than everyone else. And it certainly didn't get there by playing fair in the way we like to imagine. Instead, it learned how to position itself, how to profit from conflict without collapsing, how to benefit from global chaos while appearing untouched by it, how to sell stability in a world addicted to risk. Switzerland didn't follow the path to wealth. It engineered a shortcut. And once you see how that system was built piece by piece, decision by decision, the modern world starts to make a lot more sense. So the question isn't why Switzerland is rich. The real question is this: why does the global system keep rewarding a country that learned how to stay neutral while everyone else burns? For most of human history, wealth followed a very simple formula. If you had land, you had power. If you had resources, you had leverage. If you won wars, you got rich. Empires weren't built on ideas. They were built on things you could dig out of the ground or take from someone else. Oil, gold, spices, slaves, territory. This logic shaped the modern world. Britain ruled the seas. Spain drained the New World. Russia expanded across land. America rose on scale, resources, and industrial force. The rule was clear. Bigger meant stronger, and stronger meant richer. And this way of thinking still dominates how people understand wealth today. When a country struggles, the explanation is usually simple. They don't have enough resources. They're too small. They lost too many wars. But Switzerland breaks every part of that logic. It has no empire, no access to the ocean, no massive energy reserves, no decisive military victories. By traditional standards, Switzerland didn't just play the game poorly, it refused to play at all. And that's the first uncomfortable realization. Switzerland didn't fail at becoming a great power. It deliberately chose not to become one. While other nations chased expansion, Switzerland did something strange. It shrank its ambitions. While others poured money into armies and conquests, Switzerland invested in survival. While empires chased dominance, Switzerland optimized for endurance. This is where most explanations go wrong. People assume Switzerland is rich despite being small. In reality, Switzerland is rich because it stayed small. Scale creates power, but it also creates fragility. Empires collapse under their own weight. Large systems demand constant growth just to survive. Switzerland rejected that trade-off. Instead of asking, how do we grow faster than everyone else? They asked a very different question. How do we avoid losing no matter what happens? That question changes everything. It changes how you view risk. It changes how you structure institutions. It changes what kinds of money you accept and what kinds you refuse. Most countries are built to win good times. Switzerland was built to survive bad ones. And history is mostly bad times. Wars, currency collapses, revolutions, political purges, debt crises. Every one of these events destroys value somewhere and transfers it somewhere else. This is where Switzerland quietly positioned itself, not as the strongest, not as the loudest, not as the fastest growing, but as the place value moves toward when everything else becomes dangerous. That's not morality, that's strategy. And it explains why Switzerland consistently ignores the rules everyone else follows. They don't chase population growth. They don't push endless consumption. They don't measure success by size alone. They designed systems that prioritize trust over speed, stability over expansion, precision over volume. To the rest of the world, this looks boring. To capital, it looks irresistible. Because money doesn't want excitement. Money wants safety. And Switzerland understood something very early that most countries still don't. You don't need to control the world if you can become indispensable to the people who do. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of centuries of choices that consistently favored control over glory, discipline over dominance, and positioning over power. So when people ask why Switzerland is rich, they usually look for a single answer: banks, watches, neutrality. But those are outcomes. The real cause came earlier. It came from rejecting the traditional path to wealth and inventing a quieter, colder, far more durable one. Which brings us to the first pillar of Swiss wealth. Because before Switzerland exported trust, before it exported finance, before it exported stability, it exported something far more primitive: violence. And that story begins high in the Alps. For centuries, Switzerland had a problem most nations never talk about. It had too many men, and nothing for them to do. Life in the Alps was brutal. The land was steep. The soil was thin. Winters were long. Harvests were unreliable. You couldn't build large farms. You couldn't support cities, and you certainly couldn't absorb a growing population. So if you were a young Swiss man in the late Middle Ages, your future was simple. You stayed, and you starved, or you left. And when you left, you didn't become a trader. You didn't become a craftsman. You became a weapon. Switzerland's first export wasn't finance. It wasn't precision. It wasn't neutrality. It was men trained to kill. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't desperation. It was organized. The Swiss cantons, their early regional governments, turned violence into an industry. They didn't just allow mercenaries. They regulated them. They taxed them. They standardized them. Foreign kings didn't hire individual soldiers. They signed contracts, official agreements known as capitulations. These were medieval business deals. A foreign power would approach a Swiss canton and say, "We need soldiers." The canton would reply, "How many, for how long, and how much?" The terms were clear. Upfront payments in gold or silver, guaranteed wages, compensation for losses, and special privileges for Swiss officers. This wasn't random warfare. It was outsourced violence. And Swiss soldiers became the most feared infantry in Europe. They fought in tight formations. They carried long pikes. They advanced without breaking ranks. If you saw Swiss troops marching toward you in the 15th century, you knew what that meant. The battle was already over. This reputation made them valuable, and value attracts money. Here's the part most history books skip. While France, Austria, Spain, and the Italian states were burning through their treasuries fighting endless wars, Switzerland was getting paid. Every campaign sent wages back into the Alps. Every fallen soldier was already compensated. Every officer returned home with foreign gold. Europe was destroying capital. Switzerland was accumulating it. This created a strange imbalance. Massive amounts of hard currency flowed into a country that had very little to buy. No luxury markets, no sprawling cities, no imperial projects, just mountains and money. This is how capital accumulation really begins. Not with innovation, not with growth, but with surplus. And Switzerland had surplus early. The mercenary system didn't just enrich individuals, it enriched institutions. Cantons took a cut. Local elites controlled contracts. Families reinvested earnings. Violence created liquidity. Liquidity created power. And over time, something interesting happened. The same families who once organized regiments began doing something smarter. They stopped fighting wars and started financing them. Think about the math. Fighting wars pays once. Lending money to someone fighting wars pays repeatedly, and you don't get stabbed. Swiss elites realized that kings were always desperate for cash. Wars were expensive. Tax systems were inefficient. Debt was constant. So Swiss money began flowing back out as loans. Loans backed by centuries of accumulated war profits. This wasn't a career change. It was a business model upgrade. The skills were the same. Risk assessment, trust, enforcement, discretion. Only now the weapon wasn't a pike. It was capital. This is why Swiss banking didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew out of violence. By the time Switzerland formally embraced neutrality centuries later, it wasn't starting clean. It was sitting on a war chest built from Europe's bloodshed. Neutrality didn't create Swiss wealth. Neutrality protected it, and this pattern would repeat again and again. Whenever Europe descended into chaos, Switzerland positioned itself just close enough to profit, but far enough away to survive. They didn't need to win wars. They needed wars to exist. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Switzerland's early economy wasn't based on production. It was based on extraction, not of land, not of resources, but of instability. They turned other people's conflicts into income, other people's ambition into debt, other people's destruction into reserves. They weren't fighting wars. They were monetizing other people's wars. And when enough war money piles up, in a country with nothing to spend it on, only two things can happen. You either waste it, or you build a system to protect it. Switzerland chose the second option, and that choice leads us directly to the next pillar. Because once you have centuries of accumulated capital, the real challenge isn't making more money, it's keeping it safe. By the time Europe realized how dangerous Swiss soldiers were, something else was already happening quietly in the background. The wars kept coming, but Switzerland was slowly stepping away from the battlefield. Not because violence stopped being profitable, but because something even more profitable had revealed itself: money. After generations of mercenary service, Swiss elites found themselves sitting on something rare in medieval Europe: liquidity. Gold from France, silver from Spain, wages paid in hard currency, not promises. And unlike kings and empires, Switzerland wasn't spending that money on palaces, fleets, or endless campaigns. It was piling up. This is the moment where Switzerland's story diverges from everyone else's. Most countries accumulate wealth after they build institutions. Switzerland accumulated wealth before it had a modern state. They didn't start with banks and then get rich. They got rich and then invented banks. That order matters, because capital changes behavior. When you control money, you don't need to swing the sword yourself anymore. You just decide who gets to borrow it. And Europe, at this point, was addicted to war. Wars between kings, wars between empires, wars driven by religion, succession, and pride. All of them required one thing above everything else: cash. Kings were constantly short on funds. Tax systems were primitive. Debt was unavoidable. So they looked for lenders. And the Swiss were ready. The same families who once organized regiments now organized credit. They understood risk. They understood enforcement. They understood discretion. They knew which rulers paid back their debts and which ones vanished when wars went badly. Lending money to war wasn't a moral decision. It was a mathematical one. Financing wars paid better than fighting them, and it scaled far more efficiently. You didn't lose sons. You didn't bury soldiers. You didn't bleed manpower. You earned interest. This shift is one of the most important moments in Swiss history, and almost nobody talks about it. Because it doesn't look dramatic. There's no battle, no explosion, no heroic moment, just ledgers. But this is how real power forms. While empires exhausted themselves fighting over land, Switzerland embedded itself deeper into the financial bloodstream of Europe. They weren't choosing sides. They were choosing solvency. And this is where another misconception needs to die. Swiss neutrality did not create Swiss wealth. Neutrality came later. The wealth came first. By the time Switzerland formally embraced neutrality in the 19th century, it was already sitting on centuries of accumulated capital. Gold that had survived wars, silver that had outlived dynasties, wealth that wasn't tied to a single ruler or regime. Neutrality didn't make Switzerland rich. Neutrality protected what was already there. Think about that. Most countries try to become neutral after they are stable. Switzerland became stable because it had the money to stay neutral. That flips the usual story upside down. Now imagine the environment Switzerland found itself in. Europe was collapsing. Repeatedly. Currencies were being debased. Governments defaulted on debts. Borders shifted. Revolutions wiped out entire elites overnight. Wealth stored inside empires was constantly being reset to zero, confiscated, inflated away, destroyed. But Swiss capital wasn't tied to any single empire. It wasn't stored in grand capitals that could be invaded. It wasn't dependent on colonial flows that could be cut off. It was mobile, quiet, and increasingly cautious. This is when Switzerland begins to develop a new instinct: protection. Not protection through armies, protection through systems. Because once you've accumulated that much money, the real danger isn't losing the next war. It's losing everything when the system collapses. And systems always collapse. Kings fall, ideologies fail, borders move. Money that survives those moments becomes incredibly valuable. So Switzerland began optimizing for one thing above all else: durability. They weren't trying to grow fast, they were trying to last. This is why Swiss financial culture looks so different even today. Low tolerance for chaos, extreme preference for stability, obsession with trust and continuity. Those values weren't philosophical, they were defensive. They were shaped by centuries of watching other nations self-destruct and learning how not to. By the time the modern banking world began to form, Switzerland wasn't learning on the fly. It had been practicing quietly for hundreds of years, managing other people's money, judging political risk, surviving regime change. The sword taught them how fragile power is. Capital taught them how to outlive it. Which brings us to the next problem. Because having money is one thing, keeping it safe. When governments get desperate, when ideologies turn extreme, when states begin hunting wealth, that requires something else entirely. It requires silence. And in the 20th century, silence became Switzerland's most valuable product. So the question becomes unavoidable. How do you protect centuries of accumulated wealth when the world starts tearing itself apart? By the early 20th century, Switzerland had already solved one problem. It had money. But a far more dangerous problem was approaching. The world was breaking apart. Empires were collapsing. Borders were shifting. Governments were running out of cash. And when governments run out of money, they start looking for it. In France, the state was desperate to rebuild after World War I. Entire regions were destroyed. Debt was overwhelming. Taxes had to be raised. So French authorities began asking an uncomfortable question. Where did the money go? The answer led them straight to Switzerland. Wealthy French citizens, politicians, industrialists, military officers had quietly moved their assets across the border, not to hide from crime, but to hide from taxation. At the same time, across the border in Germany, a very different pressure was building. The Nazi regime came to power with a clear objective: control capital. They imposed strict currency controls. They restricted foreign transfers. They hunted financial enemies of the state, for Jewish families, for political opponents, for anyone the regime didn't trust. Money became a liability, and Switzerland became a target. German intelligence agents began probing Swiss banks, posing as customers, asking leading questions, trying to identify account holders. A single mistake could mean arrest or worse back in Germany. So Switzerland found itself squeezed between two forces. On one side, democratic governments demanding transparency so they could tax. On the other, totalitarian regimes demanding access so they could seize. Either choice would destroy Switzerland's financial system. If banks cooperated with foreign states, trust would vanish. If they resisted without protection, they would be crushed. So Switzerland made a decision that changed global finance forever. In 1934, they passed the Federal Banking Act. Buried inside that law was Article 47, and it did something no other country dared to do. It made banking secrecy a criminal offense, not a civil violation, not a contractual breach, a crime. If a Swiss banker revealed the identity of an account holder without authorization, they could go to prison. This was unprecedented. In most countries, confidentiality was a policy. In Switzerland, it became law. And law, backed by jail time. This single move transformed Swiss banks overnight. They weren't just discreet, they were legally silent. In a world where governments were becoming louder, more intrusive, and more desperate, Switzerland sold quiet. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, because silence doesn't discriminate. It protects the innocent and the guilty. Switzerland became a financial shelter for people trying to survive persecution, families hiding assets from confiscation, refugees protecting what little they had left. At the same time, it also protected people with far darker motives: corrupt officials, criminal networks, authoritarian leaders moving stolen wealth. The same door was open to everyone. And Switzerland didn't ask why you were knocking. That wasn't negligence. It was the product. Then came World War II, and this is the most controversial chapter in Swiss financial history. Nazi Germany looted enormous quantities of gold from occupied Europe, from national reserves, from central banks, and tragically, from victims of the Holocaust. Germany needed a way to turn that gold into usable currency. Most countries refused to touch it. Switzerland didn't. Swiss institutions acted as intermediaries. They exchanged gold for Swiss francs, one of the few stable currencies available. Those francs were then used by Germany to purchase strategic materials from neutral countries. This isn't a moral defense. It's a system explanation. Switzerland wasn't fighting for Germany. It was maintaining neutrality by continuing to function as a financial hub. After the war, Switzerland argued that it had acted as a neutral intermediary, not a political actor. Decades later, under intense international pressure, Swiss banks paid settlements related to dormant accounts and Holocaust-era assets. But by then, the economic impact had already occurred. Switzerland emerged from the war with something no other country had: trust. Not moral trust, financial trust. They held assets belonging to victors and losers, to survivors and criminals, to governments that collapsed and governments that endured. And the system held. That mattered. Because in the post-war world, fear didn't disappear. It multiplied. Communism spread in the East. Taxes rose in the West. Capital controls expanded everywhere. Money needed somewhere to go. And Switzerland had already built the infrastructure. Secrecy wasn't just about hiding money. It was about protecting continuity. Your regime could fall. Your country could change laws. Your ideology could be outlawed. But your money would still exist. Swiss banks didn't just store assets. They stored certainty, and they charged for it. This flood of foreign capital had a powerful side effect. It allowed Swiss companies to borrow cheaply. While other nations struggled with high interest rates and unstable currencies, Swiss firms had access to abundant, low-cost capital. That money funded research, precision engineering, pharmaceutical development. The world unknowingly financed Switzerland's industrial rise, just to keep its own wealth safe. This is the deeper truth behind Swiss banking secrecy. It wasn't about secrecy alone. It was about monetizing trust at a moment when trust had collapsed globally. Switzerland didn't promise morality. It promised consistency. And consistency is priceless when everything else is unpredictable. But systems don't stand still. Eventually, the world pushed back. The United States, the European Union, they demanded transparency, automatic data sharing, the end of absolute secrecy. And Switzerland adapted. Some money left. Some clients moved on. But the core advantage remained. Because even without total secrecy, Switzerland still represented something rare. A place where rules change slowly, where institutions outlive governments, where capital is treated as something to be preserved, not exploited. Switzerland didn't just protect money, they monetized trust. In a world that had almost none, and that trust didn't stay locked in vaults. It became fuel. Fuel for industry, fuel for innovation, fuel for a new kind of wealth, which leads to the next pillar. Because once silence attracts capital, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do you do with all that money when your country is too small to waste it? Once Switzerland had capital, and once it had silence, it faced a very practical problem. What do you actually build with money? When your country is small, landlocked, and surrounded by mountains, heavy industry wasn't an option. Steel mills needed cheap transport. Shipyards needed oceans. Coal-powered factories needed fuel Switzerland didn't have. If you tried to compete with Britain or Germany in mass production, you would lose. Not because you were less skilled, but because geography would bankrupt you first. Dragging tons of machinery over the Alps erased any possible profit. So the Swiss didn't ask how to produce more. They asked how to produce better. This is where Swiss economics takes a sharp turn. They adopted a rule that still defines their industry today. Maximize value. Minimize weight. If something was bulky, low margin, or easily copied, it wasn't worth making. If something was small, complex, and difficult to replace, that was worth everything. This logic didn't come from theory. It came from necessity. Take watches. The stereotype is that Switzerland makes watches because it's traditional or stylish. That's not the real reason. Mechanical watches are dense with value. A few grams of metal, springs, and gears can sell for tens of thousands of dollars. You can ship them anywhere in the world in a briefcase. No railways across continents, no ports, no fleets, just precision. But the watch industry wasn't the end goal. It was the training ground. Because once you learn how to manufacture at microscopic tolerances, you unlock something far more powerful. You gain the ability to make machines that other machines depend on. This is where Switzerland quietly dominates. Precision machine tools. These aren't consumer products. They don't have logos. They don't run ads. Most people have never heard of the companies that build them. But without Swiss machine tools, modern manufacturing collapses. If you need a robotic arm that can cut aluminum to within a micron, you don't buy it from the cheapest bidder. You buy it from the people who never miss. Swiss firms specialize in the parts no one else can afford to get wrong. Bearings, control systems, calibration equipment. They don't sell volume. They sell certainty. And certainty commands a premium. The same logic applies to food. At first glance, Switzerland shouldn't be a global food powerhouse. It has limited farmland, high labor costs, strict regulations. But Nestlé didn't build its empire by selling fresh milk. Fresh milk spoils. Fresh milk is local. Fresh milk is heavy. So Nestlé focused on something else. Shelf life. They figured out how to turn milk into products that could survive long transport, harsh climates, and years in storage. Powdered milk, chocolate, infant formula. They weren't just adding value. They were removing fragility. Once again, small inputs became global outputs. This is the deeper pattern behind Swiss manufacturing. They don't try to dominate entire industries. They dominate bottlenecks. They focus on the one component that, if it fails, breaks the whole system. They don't make the airplane. They make the part of the airplane that can't fail. They don't make the phone. They make the machine that makes the phone precise enough to work. This gives them pricing power. If your product is optional, price competition kills you. If your product is essential, price becomes secondary. This is why Swiss exports are expensive and still in demand. They're not competing on cost. They're competing on irreplaceability. And this strategy does something else that's critical for stability. It smooths volatility. Luxury watches may slow during recessions, but precision machinery, pharmaceuticals, and food don't disappear. Hospitals still need equipment. Factories still need calibration. Parents still need infant formula. High-value, high-precision industries are naturally more resilient. They don't collapse overnight. They bend. This matters because Switzerland isn't trying to maximize short-term growth. It's trying to minimize catastrophic failure. Every industrial choice feeds back into that goal. Low volume, high margins, long product cycles, fewer bubbles, fewer crashes. This is why Swiss companies tend to last generations. They're not chasing trends. They're maintaining relevance. But here's the catch. High-value production explains profitability. It explains resilience. It explains why Switzerland can export so much with so little land. But it doesn't fully explain why the entire system remains so stable, even during global chaos. Plenty of countries make high-end products. Plenty of countries have advanced manufacturing. They still suffer currency crises, debt explosions, political shocks. So there's another layer to this story. Value density makes Switzerland rich, but something else makes Switzerland untouchable. Because while factories generate income, something else quietly absorbs the world's risk. And that brings us to the next pillar, the part of the Swiss economy most people never see. An invisible empire that doesn't manufacture anything at all. If you want to understand the strangest source of Swiss wealth, don't look at factories. Look at paper, contracts, invoices, shipping agreements, forward deals. Because some of the most powerful companies in the world don't drill oil, mine copper, or grow wheat, they move it. And many of them are based in Switzerland. Zug, Geneva, Basel, quiet cities, clean streets, office buildings with names most people have never heard of. Glencore, Trafigura, Vital, Mercuria. You don't buy their products at a store. You don't see their ads. They don't sponsor sports teams. But if these firms stopped operating tomorrow, the modern world would feel it immediately. Cars would stop running. Factories would stall. Food prices would spike. Because these companies sit between producers and consumers. They are brokers of reality. Here's the paradox. Switzerland has almost no natural resources. No oil fields. No massive mines. very little farmland. Yet a staggering share of the world's raw materials is traded through Swiss firms. Not extracted, not refined, traded. This isn't accidental. It's structural. Commodity trading thrives in places that offer three things: legal flexibility, political neutrality, financial stability. Switzerland offers all three. These traders don't care where the oil comes from. They care whether the contract will be enforced, whether the money will move, whether the government will stay out of the way, and Switzerland made a quiet promise. If it's legal under Swiss law, we won't ask who you're dealing with. This is where one man changes everything. Mark Rich. In the 1970s, the global commodity market was tightly controlled. Oil flowed through a small group of Western companies. Governments dictated who could trade with whom. Sanctions were blunt instruments. Mark Rich saw an opportunity. He realized that oil wasn't scarce. Access was. If he could buy directly from producers that everyone else avoided, sanctioned states, isolated regimes, political pariahs, he could sell that oil at a premium. So he set up shop in Switzerland, not because of patriotism, because Swiss law allowed what others criminalized. Tax evasion wasn't treated as a serious crime. Trading with sanctioned states wasn't illegal under Swiss neutrality. Extradition was unlikely. This legal environment wasn't an accident, it was a feature. Mark Rich didn't break Swiss law. He exploited the space between laws. He traded with apartheid-era South Africa. He bought oil from Iran during embargoes. He dealt with Cuba and the Soviet bloc. To the United States, he was a criminal. To Switzerland, he was a businessman, and that distinction mattered. While governments argued about morality, traders made money, and that money stayed in Switzerland. Mark Rich eventually became one of the most wanted white-collar fugitives in American history. But his business didn't disappear. It evolved. His firm later became Glencore, now one of the largest commodity traders on Earth. And Mark Rich wasn't unique. He was the prototype. Swiss commodity traders learned something powerful. You don't need to own resources to control them. You just need to control the contracts. This is how Switzerland extracts value from the poorest resources on Earth, without ever touching the ground. Take a fragile country with oil. The government needs cash. The IMF comes with conditions: reforms, austerity. Swiss traders offer something simpler: cash now. In exchange, they get future production. Oil not yet pumped, copper not yet mined, grain not yet harvested. This is called pre-financing. It's essentially a payday loan for entire nations. The country gets liquidity. The trader gets control over exports, and Switzerland gets the profits. No drilling, no pollution, no soldiers, just spreadsheets. This system allows Switzerland to benefit from global extraction without bearing the costs. Environmental damage happens somewhere else. Political instability happens somewhere else. Labor exploitation happens somewhere else. The value flows through Switzerland, cleanly, quietly. This is why commodity trading contributes more to the Swiss economy than many traditional industries combined. And it's why Swiss GDP understates Swiss influence. Power doesn't always show up in production. Sometimes it shows up in coordination. Commodity traders don't create demand. They manage volatility. They profit from price differences, from timing, from information. They thrive when markets are unstable, which creates an uncomfortable feedback loop. Global instability increases trading profits, and trading profits reinforce Switzerland's position as a financial hub. Once again, Switzerland doesn't cause the chaos, but it is extremely good at monetizing it. And here's the part that makes people uneasy. This system is legal. It's not hidden. It's not underground. It operates in plain sight. Because Switzerland didn't build this empire by breaking the rules. It built it by writing rules that prioritize neutrality over judgment, consistency over morality, efficiency over appearances. This brings us to the unavoidable question: is this immoral? Or is it simply the most efficient way to operate in a world that demands energy, metals, and food, regardless of who controls them? Switzerland doesn't answer that question. It doesn't have to. It just provides the infrastructure, and the world keeps using it. Because even governments that criticize Swiss traders still depend on them. But this invisible empire only works if one condition holds: absolute safety. If investors believe Switzerland could be invaded, or destabilized, or overthrown, the entire system collapses. which explains why Switzerland is obsessed with defense, not expansion, not conquest, defense, because you can't be the world's broker unless the world believes your house will never burn down. And that leads directly to the next pillar, the strategy that turned fear itself into an economic asset. All of this only works if one assumption holds, that Switzerland will still be standing tomorrow. You can be the world's banker. You can broker its resources. You can hold its money. But if people believe someone can simply come in and take it, the entire system collapses overnight. Switzerland understood this earlier than almost anyone else, which is why its obsession with defense isn't a cultural quirk. It's an economic requirement. During World War II, Switzerland found itself surrounded. Nazi Germany to the north, fascist Italy to the south, occupied France to the west. Hitler openly despised Switzerland. He referred to it as an unnatural state, a splinter that didn't belong. There were invasion plans. They had a name. And Switzerland knew something important. It could not win a conventional war, so it didn't plan to fight one. Instead, Switzerland adopted a strategy that bordered on insanity. If invaded, the Swiss army would not defend the borders. They would retreat, straight into the Alps. This plan was called the National Redoubt. Over years, the Swiss quietly hollowed out their mountains. Not symbolically, literally. Entire fortresses were carved into rock. Underground hospitals, armories, command centers, hydropower plants. At the same time, every major bridge, tunnel, and transport route into the country was pre-rigged with explosives. The message was simple. If you invade, we will destroy our own infrastructure. You won't capture a functioning economy. You won't seize our banks. You won't extract value. You will inherit rubble and a war fought uphill. This wasn't deterrence through strength. It was deterrence through denial. Switzerland didn't threaten to beat invaders. It threatened to make invasion pointless. And that worked. The war passed. Switzerland remained intact. But the mindset didn't disappear. It hardened. After World War II, most countries demobilized. Switzerland did the opposite. It normalized paranoia. Universal conscription became standard. Every able-bodied male served. Weapons didn't stay in bases. They went home. Assault rifles in closets. Ammunition nearby. Training refreshed regularly. At the same time, the bunker program expanded. For decades, Swiss law required that residential buildings include nuclear fallout shelters, not government shelters, private ones. Today, Switzerland has enough bunker space for more than its entire population. That's not symbolism. That's policy. And here's the paradox. Despite being heavily armed, Switzerland has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. Because this isn't about aggression, it's about credibility. The entire world understands one thing. Switzerland is not worth messing with. Not because it's powerful, but because it's prepared to lose everything rather than surrender control. And this is where paranoia turns into profit. Investors hate uncertainty. They hate surprises. They hate regime change. They hate sudden policy shifts. When crises hit, financial crashes, wars, pandemics, capital does one thing. It runs. And it looks for the safest place to hide. Over and over again, it chooses Switzerland. The Swiss franc isn't just a currency, it's a signal that the system behind it is unlikely to implode. During global crises, investors sell risky assets and buy Swiss francs. This demand pushes the currency higher, which creates an almost absurd situation. At times, investors are willing to accept negative interest rates just to park money in Switzerland. Think about that. You give the bank $1 million, and a year later, you get back slightly less, and you're fine with it, because safety is worth more than return. That is the ultimate expression of trust. The world doesn't pay Switzerland for innovation. It doesn't pay Switzerland for growth. It pays Switzerland for survival, for continuity, for the belief that when everything else breaks, this place won't. This belief does more than strengthen the currency. It attracts institutions, international organizations, corporate headquarters, governing bodies, not just for tax reasons, but because Switzerland is seen as a permanent address. Governments rise and fall, but Switzerland doesn't disappear. This perception lowers borrowing costs. It stabilizes financial flows. It reinforces the entire system we've been building piece by piece. Mercenaries, banking, secrecy, manufacturing, commodity trading. None of it works without credibility. And credibility is built by proving, again and again, that collapse is unlikely. Switzerland didn't stumble into safety. It engineered it. It turned fear into infrastructure, infrastructure into trust, and trust into economic power. Which brings us to a strange realization. Switzerland isn't rich because it's relaxed. It's rich because it's paranoid in a disciplined, organized, institutional way. The world pays Switzerland just to hold its money. And as long as that belief holds, the system holds. But no system is eternal. And even Switzerland isn't immune to cracks. Which leads us to the final question. What happens when trust itself starts to erode? For more than a century, Switzerland looked untouchable. Its banks stood firm while others collapsed. Its currency held value while others inflated away. Its institutions outlived wars, revolutions, and regime change. But no system runs perfectly forever. And in recent years, the Swiss model has started to show cracks. The most visible fracture came in March of 2023. Credit Suisse, one of the two pillars of Swiss banking, founded in the 19th century to finance railways and industrial growth, a symbol of stability at least on paper, collapsed. Not because of a single crisis, but because of a long pattern of failure. Risky bets, repeated scandals, weak internal controls, eroding trust, confidence drained away. And in modern finance, confidence is everything. The Swiss government was forced to intervene, orchestrating an emergency takeover by UBS. It worked. The system survived, but the illusion cracked. For the first time in decades, the world saw that even Swiss banks are not immune to mismanagement. At the same time, another pillar quietly weakened. Secrecy. The era of absolute banking secrecy is over. Under pressure from the United States and the European Union, Switzerland agreed to automatic exchange of information, AEOI. Bank data now flows across borders. Tax authorities receive information automatically. Hidden accounts are harder to hide. If you're trying to secretly park money in Switzerland today, you're already too late. The vault isn't sealed the way it used to be. And as transparency increased, certain types of money began to leave. Illicit funds, high-risk capital, clients who relied on opacity rather than stability. That money didn't disappear. It moved to Dubai, to Singapore, to offshore crypto wallets. This forced Switzerland to confront a reality it had avoided for decades. The old model couldn't operate exactly the same way anymore. But here's the important part. Switzerland didn't panic. It adapted. Just as it once moved from mercenaries to banking, from secrecy to industry, from industry to trading, it began repositioning again. This time, toward digital assets. In and around the city of Zug, a new ecosystem emerged. Crypto Valley, blockchain startups, digital custody firms, regulatory sandboxes, not anarchic crypto chaos, institutional crypto. The pitch is familiar, clear rules, predictable regulation, long-term stability. Switzerland isn't trying to hide digital wealth, it's trying to legitimize it, to become the place where new forms of capital feel safe operating at scale. This isn't a rejection of the old model, it's an update. The core principle hasn't changed. Switzerland doesn't chase trends. It positions itself where trust will be needed next. From gold to bank accounts, to contracts, to digital ledgers. Different assets, same strategy. They're not abandoning the system. They're upgrading it. But this raises a final, uncomfortable question. If Switzerland's success has always depended on serving global power, on protecting wealth regardless of who owns it, what happens when the nature of power itself changes? That question leads us to the final truth. Because Switzerland isn't just a country, it's a mirror. And what it reflects says more about the world than it does about the Alps. So after all of this, it's tempting to ask a simple question. Is Switzerland good or bad? But that question misses the point. Switzerland didn't become rich by being virtuous, and it didn't survive by being cruel. It survived by being useful. Useful to kings who needed soldiers, useful to governments that needed loans, useful to families who needed silence, useful to corporations that needed stability, useful to a world that constantly produces chaos and then looks for somewhere safe to put the consequences. Switzerland never promised to fix the world, It promised to function no matter how broken the world became. That's the paradox. We criticize Switzerland for holding dirty money, for trading with uncomfortable partners, for refusing to take moral sides. And yet, when markets crash, money runs there. When currencies weaken, investors buy francs. When systems fail, institutions relocate there. The world hates what Switzerland represents, but it keeps paying them anyway. Because deep down, the global system doesn't reward goodness. It rewards reliability. Switzerland didn't chase glory. It didn't chase dominance. It didn't chase growth at any cost. It chased permanence. 500 years of choosing stability over spectacle, continuity over conquest, discipline over drama. And that choice compounded again and again and again. So the next time you see Switzerland presented as a harmless postcard country, all mountains, milk, and chocolate, remember what actually built it. Not miracles, not luck, not morality, but an unbroken commitment to serving power without ever trying to become it. A little milk, a little cocoa, and 5 centuries of ruthless, disciplined capitalism.